This is the picture of Switzerland that is the most familiar. Distant snow-capped peaks and alpine meadows framed by dark pines. But some parts of the country are famed more for their spectacular forests than for their views. The mountains of the Jura region are gentle and undulating, cloaked in dense forests of silver fir, pine and beech. The trees often grow up to altitudes of 6,000 feet, and winters can be both harsh and long. It is common for snow to lie on the ground for over half the year. It is already March, but the snow is still falling in the forests, blanketing them in silence. Only one sound disturbs the stillness, the territorial calls of a bird that only feels at home in northern forests such as these. Most species of owls shun dense woodland, as they find hunting hard in such close confines. But Tengmalm's owl is perfectly adapted to life deep in the pine forests of Europe, North America, Russia, and even China. The owl is named after the Swedish naturalist Peter Gustav Tengmalm, who first described it over 200 years ago. Only the male Tengmalm owl stays in the breeding area throughout the winter, guarding abandoned woodpecker holes. The females are nomadic and usually spend the winter months lower down in the valleys, where there is more food available. The male survives by storing prey in crevices and feeding on it when food is scarce. He does most of his hunting deep within the forest, occasionally venturing out along forest rides or clearings, but he always avoids large tracts of open ground. He seldom leaves his chosen stretch of forest, as empty woodpecker holes are scarce, and he must constantly defend his territory from other males. Once he finds a mate to occupy a nest hole, he will no longer need to guard the area. He is already surveying possible nest sites, but he will leave the final choice of hole up to the female. But some other animals have a different reason for investigating abandoned nest holes. Of course, the woodpecker made them well out of reach of most predators, but the pine marten, a close relative of the weasel, is an agile climber. It can easily reach the holes in search of birds' eggs, or even young. It is too early in the year for the nest to be occupied, but the pine marten often becomes a great threat to the owls later in the year when they are raising young. Towards the end of April, the winter begins to loosen its grip on the mountains, and almost imperceptibly at first, the thaw begins. At last, the sun begins to have some warmth behind it. Other birds, such as the capercaillie, are also beginning to compete for territory and mates. The male's call echoes across the clearings. Even before it has melted, the first crocuses begin to force their way up through the snow. Gradually, the white is replaced by a spreading carpet of purple flowers. Spring may come late to the Jura, but once it has arrived, the transformation is remarkable. As the days grow longer, The character of the forest begins to change too. The beech trees are cloaked in the delicate green of fresh new leaves, and the pines begin to release their seeds, providing rich pickings for woodland mammals and birds. The male Tengmalm owl spends most of the day roosting on a branch a few hundred yards away from the nesting area. Like most owls, Tengmalms are hunters of the night, able to locate their prey in the dark through acute hearing. Needle-sharp talons, hidden by feathers and soft-edged plumage, allow them to make a swift, silent kill. Enormous pupils enable owls to see almost 3 times better in dim light than we can. The male is still inspecting possible nest holes, unaware that he's being watched by another forest resident, the pygmy owl. As he tries to enter the hole, he's suddenly dive-bombed by the pygmy, which defends its territory all year round. Being Europe's smallest owl, about the size of a starling, it is often preyed upon by larger birds such as the Tengmalm, so it has every reason to want to drive the Tengmalm out of its own backyard. The sharp-eyed pygmy is an exception, for most animals have difficulty spotting the Tengmalm when it is camouflaged against a tree trunk during the day. The Tengmalm waits for nightfall before setting off to hunt for voles or dormice, which have just emerged from their winter hibernation. The mammals have no cover now that the snow has melted, and the male has no difficulty in catching a number of rodents in one night. He carefully stores each kill in one of the nest holes as a tempting gift for the female. The Tengmalm is perfectly suited to hunting in dense forest, being smaller and more agile than most other species of owl. He continues to hunt until the floor of the nest is covered with offerings. At last, the male's display pays off, and he succeeds in attracting a female to one of the nests. Finding the quarters to her liking, she accepts the male's offerings and starts to devour one of his thoughtful gifts. Tengmalm's owls have become so dependent upon the original architect of their nest holes, the black woodpecker, that the two are almost inseparable. Both male and female woodpecker excavate roost holes in sound beech trees by drilling out a round tunnel and then chiseling downwards and cutting out a spacious chamber. Usually it is the male that attracts the female into his hole during the breeding season. Sometimes they use the same hole year after year. The female has just laid 4 eggs. They take turns to incubate them, changing over every 3 hours or so. The arrangement of claws on their feet allows them to cling onto the vertical trunk, and the tail is so stiff that it acts as a prop. The greater spotted woodpecker usually chooses rotten spruce or pine for its roost holes. It is smaller than the black woodpecker and makes correspondingly narrower holes. These serve as nest holes for pygmy owls. The smaller quarters suit them perfectly. By mid-May, the female Tengmalm is also incubating her own clutch of 5 eggs inside the nest chamber. During the next 27 days, she will rely on the store that the male has left in the hole, as well as fresh food that he brings her. Despite this devotion on the part of the male, the pair only remain together for one breeding season. After performing her maternal duties, the female will depart for warmer climes again before the cold of winter sets in. By early June, there is plenty of food about. Caterpillars have emerged to feed on leaves and new shoots, and the forest is alive with the humming of insects, attracted to the flowers in the leafy canopy overhead. The race to feed hungry mouths during the short summer has already started for many birds. The black woodpecker young are now 3 weeks old and need both parents to keep them well supplied with ants and beetle larvae. A blackbird brings up her family in another hole nearby. The Tengmalm owls are not far behind, for the first chick is beginning to hatch out inside the nest hole. It is an exhausting process, which can last for many hours. Owls lay their eggs at 2-day intervals like most other birds of prey. This means that the first chick to emerge will be almost 10 days older than its youngest sibling. The weakest chicks seldom survive. Like the other forest birds, Tengmalm's owl is careful to bring up its young around the same time that its main prey is also increasing in numbers. Dormice mate soon after they emerge from winter hibernation in April, and now the female is bringing up her young in a snug nest well above ground, a woodpecker hole, of course. The first few days after birth, the young are blind and naked. After 2 weeks, their first coat of fur will have developed. She emerges at night to feed on fallen pine seeds and lick up moisture from the dew-covered moss. But she is always aware that predators might be about. In the forest clearings, fresh new grass provides grazing for roe deer and chamois, while the alpine flowers bloom quickly to ensure pollination before the cold winds of autumn return the insects to their torpid state. There is plenty of food here too for ground nesting birds, like the grey wagtail. While the female Tengmalm is brooding her young, the male provides food for both her and the chicks. He calls in advance to let the female know that he is approaching the nest with food, so that she can receive it from him at the entrance. Only the female actually feeds the chicks in the nest. They are only a few days old, and their eyes are still closed. The female tears the prey to pieces and tenderly feeds them slivers of meat. After the first week, they will be able to feed themselves. Each bird eats an average of 1 dormice a day, and the adult visits the nest about 6 times every night. As the first rays of sunlight penetrate the forest, a wild boar ambles off in search of roots and bulbs. Though a fortnight old by now, young dormice are still helpless and extremely vulnerable to predators. This family has not been so lucky with its ground floor home. The female desperately runs to and fro with her young to move them to a safer location. Voles and dormice seem to be everyone's victims. About a mile away, the pygmy owls are bringing up their family. Every year, the female pygmy carefully balances the number of eggs she lays to match the food supply of mammals and birds. This means that she can guarantee all her young will survive, and she's one of the few owls to wait until her last egg is laid before incubating, so that all the chicks are at the same stage of development. These birds are about 2 weeks old by now. Though they often hunt the same prey, pygmy owls avoid direct competition with Tengmalm's owl by hunting during the day. They have the poorest night vision of all the owls. The pygmy locates its prey by sight rather than by sound, and launches itself silently into a steep dive. Once it has made the kill, it carries it up onto a favourite branch, where it removes the head. All the prey is stored on the branch, and the female simply collects an item from there every time she needs more food. Despite this rather unpleasant habit, the pygmy is an extremely clean bird, and when it isn't hunting, it is usually preening itself. Most owls don't clean out their nests, but the pygmy carefully removes every pellet and drops it over the side. Debris-covered leaves often give away the location of a pygmy's nest. During these weeks of plenty, both the male and female Tengmalm are also hunting. Often they too bring back more food than the chicks can cope with. The female caches the surplus food in the nest hole. The larder serves as a buffer against a sudden shortage of prey. She is even careful to use the food in the order of storage. The chicks are now 3 weeks old and covered in chocolate brown down. They are at their most ugly. They are now able to feed themselves, swallowing their food whole. Now that the female has left the nest, she never bothers to clean it. So the young chicks stagger about in an ever-growing mound of pellets, rotting meat and other debris, looking rather like squat gargoyles. Finally sated, they fall asleep. By early July, the pygmies are almost a month old, and they are ready to leave the nest. They peer longingly out of the hole. There is no room to practice wing flaps here. One bird stretches its cramped wings inside the close confines and begins to struggle out towards the open. Young pygmies are able to fly as soon as they leave the nest. Their parents will lure them into cover and feed them for the next 3 weeks. As soon as they are independent, the adults will drive them out of their territory. Inside the Tengmalm nest, the 4-week-old owls are also only a few days away from fledging. They grow increasingly curious about their surroundings. Owls cannot move their eyes as we do, so they have to turn their heads instead. Looking at their dark plumage, it is hard to imagine that these birds will ever resemble their parents. Now they are so impatient to feed that when an adult approaches the nest, they fight to climb up and take food from her at the entrance. The time has come to leave. The eldest chick is the first to peer out of the hole at the dark forest, which will soon be its home. Tengmalm's owls are also able to fly as soon as they leave the nest. The 2 younger chicks are still not quite ready to take the plunge. But the oldest seems to be taking it all in its stride. Its exertions have certainly given it a healthy appetite, and the adult soon appears with food. The transfer can be quite tricky if you're not sure of your balance. As dawn breaks, the chick looks none the worse for having spent its first night outside the nest. During the night, the younger birds have also made their escape. Over the next month, their parents will lead them up to a mile from the area, although they will continue to be fed by the adults for another 6 weeks. A year from now, they will start their own families and will begin to search for a woodpecker hole of their own.